I was 19 the last time I saw my parents. They stood in the doorway of our home, my childhood home, and told me I had until sunset to pack my things and leave. No tears, no long emotional goodbye, not even a decent explanation. Just a cold stare from my father and a tight-lipped silence from my mother, as if I were some tenant whose lease had expired. I remember standing there, backpack already on my shoulder, half-full suitcase at my feet, trying to understand how everything unraveled so fast. One day I was their son. The next, I was a burden they couldn't wait to shake off. My name's Cole. I'm 27 now, and while I've moved on, built a life for myself, quiet, modest, nothing flashy, there's a part of me that still circles back to that moment, like an echo I can't shake. It's not just the betrayal that stings, but the sheer speed of it. One minute I was eating dinner at our worn-down oak table, and the next, my parents were accusing me of being ungrateful, of taking too long to grow up, of costing too much for someone doing so little. The truth? I wasn't perfect. I wasn't some prodigy or overachiever. I had just dropped out of college that spring, unsure of what I wanted, struggling with anxiety I hadn't yet learned to name. My friends were graduating, moving into internships, posting their new apartments on social media, and I was stuck, lost. But I was trying. I worked 2 part-time jobs and had started taking online classes again. I helped out around the house, paid rent when I could, and never asked for more than the bare minimum. None of that seemed to matter. My parents, my father, especially, saw me as dead weight. And when I pushed back, when I finally spoke up during one of his tirades and said I wasn't going to be talked to like some stranger on the street, he made good on his promise. He kicked me out that night. Said if I wanted to live like an adult, I could start by figuring things out without his roof or money. I never went back. Never called. Never sent a letter. And they never reached out either. Not once in 8 years. The only person who ever kept in touch was my grandmother, my dad's mom, believe it or not. She was the only one who looked at me with softness, even when I was at my lowest. Her name was Evelyn, and if I had to describe her, I'd say she was half whiskey, half wildflower. A woman who grew up during the war, married young, raised 3 kids, buried 2, and still managed to smile like life hadn't broken her. She lived up in the mountains, about 3 hours away from where I eventually settled, and over the years, we exchanged letters and phone calls. Nothing overly sentimental. She wasn't that kind of person, but enough to know she still thought about me. She passed away last month, peacefully, in her sleep, 93 years old. When I got the call from her lawyer, it was like being doused in cold water. I hadn't even known she was sick. She'd hidden it from me, probably on purpose. She hated pity. The lawyer, a man named Garrett Andrews, said she'd left a will, that I'd been named in it, that she wanted me to be present for the reading. It was all very formal, very specific. She insisted on it being read in person, Garrett told me. At the cabin. The cabin. God, I hadn't been up there since I was a kid. Back when family still meant Sunday dinners and summer hikes. I had memories of fishing with her on the dock, of her swatting at mosquitoes with a dish towel while telling me stories about the war, of me falling asleep on that old plaid couch while she played some dusty record in the background. I took time off work and made the drive up the mountain on a crisp Tuesday morning. The trees were just starting to turn, golden reds and fire-orange leaves dotting the sides of the winding road. The air smelled like pine and smoke and something older I couldn't name. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the first thing I saw was the truck. A brand new, lifted Ford F-150. Too clean to belong here. I parked beside it, already uneasy, and stepped out of my car. That's when I saw them. My parents. My mother was in a beige coat, fur-lined, her hair styled in soft waves I didn't remember her ever having. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, that same condescending frown on his face he always wore when he was trying to look important. Behind them stood my cousin Rachel, early 30s, all sharp cheekbones and fake sympathy, holding a tablet and looking like she was about to pitch a sales plan. I should have turned around then, but I didn't. I walked forward, slow and cautious, like stepping into a room with too many traps. My mother turned first. Her eyes went wide for a second before she plastered on a smile. "Cole," she said, voice airy, as if we were bumping into each other at a farmer's market. "Oh my, I didn't know you were coming. You were invited?" My father added, squinting at me like I was some contractor who'd wandered onto his land. "She left me a message," I replied evenly. Said the will was being read today. Here. Rachel stepped forward, sliding her sunglasses onto her head. Isn't it wild being back? Gosh, it's been, what years? 8, I said. She laughed like I'd told a joke. Garrett Andrews appeared on the porch just then, holding a thick folder and a small box under one arm. His suit looked too crisp for the cabin, but he wore it like armor. He glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension, then motioned for everyone to come inside. We filed into the living room like strangers. The fireplace was lit, the air inside just warm enough to feel cozy. Nothing had changed. The couch was still there. The record player. The photos on the wall. Me and Grandma fishing. Her wedding picture. One of her 3 children at the beach, back when they were all still alive. My dad lingered near the fireplace, staring at the photo for a second too long before returning to his usual indifference. Garrett didn't waste time. He cleared his throat and began reading the will. Most of it was standard. Small sums of money left to friends, a few personal items given to neighbors. Then came the bigger stuff. To my son, Ronald, that's my dad. And his wife, Karen, I leave my Buick and my collection of vinyl records. My mother blinked. Wait, the Buick? And the records, Garrett confirmed, moving on. Rachel got a set of antique silverware and a note that said, "For hosting the worst Thanksgiving I ever endured." I almost choked. Rachel didn't laugh. Then Garrett paused. His expression shifted, just a little. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This," he said slowly, "was a letter Evelyn asked me to deliver by hand. To Cole, and Cole only." He handed it to me. The room fell into a suffocating silence. My father shifted. My mother frowned. Rachel looked like someone had slapped her. "What's in it?" my dad asked. Garrett raised a brow. "That's not for you to know." I held the envelope. My name was written on the front in Grandma's careful handwriting. Just seeing it again made my throat tighten. "Wait," my mother said suddenly, glancing between Garrett and my father. "What about the property?" Garrett turned to her. "You mean the cabin?" "Yes," she said, laughing a little too loudly. "Evelyn always said she wanted the family to have it. We've already started talking to contractors about renovating it into a rental lodge. It's the perfect location." He held up a hand. "The cabin wasn't left to either of you." Now it was my father who snapped. "Then who?" Garrett looked at me. "Evelyn left it to Cole. The cabin, the land, everything." And just like that, the room turned to stone. My parents froze. Rachel dropped her sunglasses. And me? I hadn't even opened the letter yet. But I knew, deep down, I was about to find out why. And they were about to find out they'd made a mistake. A very big one. I didn't open the letter right away. I probably should have. Maybe it would have given me some armor before the storm hit. But something in me, something old and bruised, knew I needed to wait. Not out of fear, but because I wanted them to feel it. The not knowing. The unease. It was the first time in my life I'd held power in a room with them. Real power. The kind that doesn't come from yelling louder or dressing sharper or having a bigger bank account. No, this was different. This was the weight of Grandma's will behind me. Her words, still sealed in an envelope, and somehow, I could feel them humming. My father was the first to recover. He stepped forward, arms tense at his sides. "This has to be a mistake." Garrett didn't blink. "I assure you, it's not. But Evelyn told us. She said she wanted the family to use this place. She talked to me about renovations, updating the foundation, modern plumbing. She wanted it turned into something livable." Garrett clasped his hands. If she said that, it wasn't reflected in her will. She left the cabin, the land, and all its contents to Cole. Sole beneficiary. It's legally binding. My mother's face was tight, her lips thinning to a line. She was in her 90s. She might not have been in her right mind. She was, Garrett said plainly. I had her medical evaluations cleared and notarized. She passed 2 cognitive screenings before finalizing her estate. Maybe Cole manipulated her. Rachel cut in, voice sharp now. Maybe he pressured her. Got in her head. I snorted. I couldn't help it. I haven't even seen her in 6 months. The last time we talked, she chewed me out for not replacing the brake pads on my car. Real manipulative of me. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Don't be smug. Why not? I said, still calm. You've been smug your whole life. I figure I'm overdue. It was like someone had cracked the window and let a cold wind blow through. Rachel blinked slowly, but she didn't argue. She just took a seat, crossed her legs, and pulled out her phone like she was suddenly too busy for the conversation. My dad turned on Garrett again. And there's nothing in there for us? No trust, no clause, nothing. Garrett scanned the remaining pages. No, just a note for you both. He handed over a single folded paper. They unfolded it like it might bite. My father read it first. His jaw clenched. Then my mother read it, and her hand covered her mouth. Garrett didn't ask for it back. He didn't need to. I could guess what it said. She'd always had a way with brutal honesty. After that, the room fractured. Rachel stood and walked outside without a word. My mother followed slowly, dazed, like someone trying to solve a riddle in a language they didn't understand. My father lingered by the fireplace for a moment longer, staring into the flames like he was hoping they'd offer him answers. When he finally turned to me, there was something unfamiliar in his eyes. It wasn't regret. It wasn't sadness. It was resentment. You think you've won something, he said quietly, but you don't understand what you're getting into. I stared back. Neither did you when you kicked me out. He flinched. Not much, but I saw it. Then he walked out, boots heavy on the floorboards, and the cabin was silent again. Garrett cleared his throat. Do you want to read the letter alone? I nodded. Yeah, thanks. He left without another word. And just like that, I was alone in the place that had once been a sanctuary, and now, somehow, felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. I didn't read the letter until later that night. After they left. After the sun dropped behind the treetops and the sky went from bruised purple to velvet black. I made a fire, poured myself a glass of her ancient whiskey I found in the cabinet, and sat in the armchair by the window, the one with the lopsided cushion that had always squeaked when I shifted. The letter was written on thick, cream paper in her usual neat cursive. Cole, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Which means I no longer have to pretend to be polite to people who don't deserve it. I want you to know I always saw you. You were never invisible to me, even when they tried to make you feel like a shadow. I saw how hard you tried, how much you carried, how much you were blamed for simply existing. That house was never warm. Not after your grandfather passed. I think your father learned the wrong lessons from him. How to punish, but not how to forgive. How to expect, but not how to give. You didn't deserve what happened. And I couldn't stop it. But I could give you this. The cabin is yours. Everything in it. The land, too. They're already planning to rip it apart. I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep. They want to flip it, turn it into another hollow project. But you and I both know this place is more than wood and nails. Keep it, or don't. But make the choice on your own terms. You're more than what they told you. Love always. Grandma Evelyn. I cried. Not the loud, heaving kind. Just quiet tears slipping down my face, hot and sharp, as if every word had peeled back a layer of armor I didn't realize I'd worn for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. The next morning, I found them still here. I walked out to the gravel driveway, coffee mug in hand, only to see Rachel pacing near her truck with a Bluetooth earpiece and a binder full of glossy brochures. My parents stood nearby, both looking exhausted but tense, like coiled springs. When Rachel noticed me, she clicked off the call and waved the binder. Okay, so here's the thing, she said brightly. We've been thinking, and there's actually a really smart way we can all benefit from this. You're obviously the owner now, which is great. Unexpected, but great. And instead of letting this place just sit here, you could let us handle the renovations. We front the costs, manage the logistics, and then we split the profits from rentals. I sipped my coffee. She kept going. It's win-win. You don't lift a finger. We already have the contacts. The contractor I was talking to, he's ready to start next week. It'll be high-end, rustic luxury. Think quartz counters, exposed beams, maybe a sauna. My father chimed in. You're not exactly in a position to handle a property this size, Cole. You've got, what, a one-bedroom apartment and a job at a bookstore. He said it like it was a crime. My mother offered a smile like she was trying out empathy for the first time. We just don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Your grandmother was sentimental. This place might feel like a burden more than a blessing. Rachel stepped forward, flipping to a page in the binder. Look, here's a breakdown of projected revenue. We're talking 6 figures within the first year. They thought they were being generous. They thought they were helping. But I saw it for what it was, a setup. A way to rope me in, to make me dependent, and then slowly edge me out once the paperwork was signed. They'd done it before, with my uncle's estate, with my cousin's old business. Smiling while planting knives. I nodded slowly. Thanks for the offer. They all straightened a little. Hopeful. But no. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Rachel blinked. Excuse me. I'm not selling. I'm not flipping. And I'm definitely not handing it over to the people who cut me out of their lives and only showed up again when there was real estate involved. My mother flinched. My father's face hardened. Rachel laughed. Come on. You really think you can manage this on your own? I think I'll figure it out, I said. I always do. They started to argue about logistics, about family legacy, about throwing away opportunity. But I'd stopped listening. I was already walking back inside, letting the door creak shut behind me. They didn't leave right away. They lingered. And later that day, I found out why. Because they weren't done yet. And neither was I. They didn't leave that day. I half expected them to pack up their brochures, their fake smiles, their passive-aggressive guilt trips, and drive down the mountain, muttering about ungrateful children. But no, they stayed. Claimed they were just tying up loose ends and mourning in their own way. But something about the way they kept circling the cabin, talking in hushed tones, taking phone calls just out of earshot, put me on edge. By the third day, I was watching them through the window like I was in some kind of wilderness thriller. My father spent his mornings pacing near the tree line, probably debating how to spin the situation into something salvageable. My mother floated in and out of rooms inside the cabin like a ghost, touching things that didn't belong to her. Grandma's quilt, her birdhouse collection, the chip tea set we'd used every winter. Rachel, meanwhile, was still glued to her phone, typing furiously, stopping only to take selfies near the fireplace. I caught her recording a video once. She was holding the wolf folder like a prop, smiling as she whispered something about family heritage. On the fourth morning, I found the front door wide open. I was up early, earlier than usual, thanks to a storm that had rattled the windows all night. The fireplace had gone out, and the cabin was cold enough to see my breath. I got up, groggy, still half asleep, and stumbled out of bed to make coffee. But when I walked into the living room, something felt off. The door, wide open, cold air pouring in, pine needles scattered across the floor. I stepped outside barefoot and looked around. The cars were still in the driveway. No signs of forced entry. No wildlife tracks. But something felt wrong. I checked the side shed. Nothing missing. I checked the back door. Still locked. Then I opened the door to Grandma's old office. And my heart dropped. The safe was open. Not just open, emptied. I didn't even know the combination. Grandma had always said it was for important things, but she never told me what those were. I figured it was old photos, maybe her wedding ring, maybe a few bonds or sentimental heirlooms. It had been locked the entire time I'd been there, tucked behind a bookshelf, hidden in plain sight. But now the bookshelf had been moved. The rug crumpled. The frame on the wall above it slightly crooked. Someone had gone digging, and they found it. I confronted them after breakfast. I didn't lead with accusations. I didn't scream. I just asked, casually, anyone know what happened to the safe? The silence that followed told me everything. Rachel didn't even look up from her eggs. Safe? My mother frowned. Your grandmother had a safe? My father didn't answer. He reached for his coffee like he hadn't heard the question. I stared at them one by one. It was in her office, behind the bookshelf. It's been emptied. Rachel blinked. Well, maybe she emptied it before she passed. Funny, I said, because I found the lock mechanism pried open. That made my mother twitch. Whoever opened it didn't know the combination. They forced it. And judging by the scratches and the broken lock pin, it happened recently. Still, they said nothing. So I said it for them. Which one of you did it? My father stood slowly. You're being paranoid. No, I said. I'm being observant. The safe was untouched until yesterday. Now it's empty. The only people who've been in and out of the cabin are you three. So again, who opened the safe? Rachel scoffed. You're acting like it's a crime. Maybe she left something in there for all of us. Ever think of that? Maybe she did, I said. But she didn't leave it to you. They didn't like that. My father leaned forward, voice low. That woman was nearly blind by the end. Half the time she called me by her dead brother's name. You think she was of sound mind when she wrote you into her will? She passed 2 screenings, I said flatly. Then she was manipulated. I stared at him. By who? The grandson she hadn't seen in months? Or the son and daughter-in-law she lived next door to? He didn't answer, but I could see the frustration behind his eyes. This wasn't going how he wanted. They came here expecting to sweep in, take what they assumed was theirs, and be gone before the dust settled. Now they were trapped. on land they didn't own, in a cabin they didn't inherit. And their golden opportunity, whatever they'd stolen from that safe, was all they had left. That night, I made a decision. I installed a camera. Nothing fancy, just an old trail cam Grandma used to monitor the deer. I mounted it inside the bookshelf, aimed at the office door. If they came back, I'd know. Then I locked the door. The next morning, the door was ajar again, and the safe was still empty. But the bookshelf? The camera was gone. I didn't confront them this time. I waited, watched, took notes. They were up to something. The way Rachel kept ducking into town. The way my father started writing things down in a little leather notebook. The way my mother kept asking about paperwork. Do you even have the deed yet? Shouldn't you transfer it to your name? What if squatters move in after you leave? They were trying to find a loophole, trying to shake the foundation, trying to make me doubt. It almost worked. Until Garrett called. Cole, he said. I just got a very interesting phone call. From who? From a realtor. She said she's representing your parents in a potential sale of the cabin. Asked for confirmation on zoning and title transfer. She even sent a tentative property listing. I felt cold all over. They're trying to sell the cabin? I said. Without your signature, they can't. But they're shopping it. Talking to buyers. Floating numbers. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's bold. Even for them. I can file a cease and desist, Garrett said. But it's probably time we file the deed in your name officially. Probate cleared. Everything's in order. We just need your signature. I told him I'd be there by morning. But it was already too late. Because while I was on the phone, my parents were in the office. Not the main one. Grandma's second office. The one in the attic. I didn't even remember it existed until I heard a noise above me. Slow, creaking footsteps directly over the living room. The attic stairs were old and tucked behind a closet door, barely visible unless you knew where to look. I opened it quietly, climbed each step like it might collapse under me. And there they were. My mother, flashlight in hand. Rachel, going through boxes. My father, kneeling beside a stack of file cabinets with a crowbar. They didn't see me at first. I watched them pick through her life. Her letters. Her bank statements. Her property tax filings. Did you seriously think she wouldn't keep a backup copy? Rachel whispered. She was paranoid. There's got to be something up here. A note. An addendum. Anything we can use. I don't care if we have to forge it, my father muttered. All we need is something with a signature. That's when I stepped forward. And the floor creaked. 3 heads whipped around. They froze. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just said 2 words. Get out. Rachel opened her mouth, probably to spin some story about how they were preserving family memories. My mother looked like she might cry. My father, God help him, stood up like he was the one owed an explanation. We have a right. No, I said. You had a right. And you burned it. He pointed a finger at me. You don't know what's at stake here. I do now, I said. You're thieves. My mother finally spoke. Cole, please, don't do this. We're your family. We made mistakes, sure, but this isn't how it has to go. You kicked me out at 19, I said quietly. You didn't call. You didn't write. You didn't care if I lived or died. That's not true, she whispered. I lived out of my car for 3 months. Silence. Rachel muttered something about dramatic flair. My father stepped forward again. You want to throw it all away over a grudge? No, I said. I want you out by sunset. And if we don't, I smiled. I'll call the sheriff. Tell him about the safe, the attempted forgery, the theft, the illegal listing. I'll give him the names of every buyer you contacted, every appraiser you sent photos to. They were dead silent. Then I added one last thing. And I'll make sure the story gets out. Every person in this town loved Grandma. They trusted her. Imagine how they'll feel when they hear her son looted her cabin before the body was cold. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Real or not, I didn't care. They left that afternoon. But what they left behind, that's what changed everything. Because when I cleaned out the attic, I found something they missed. A hidden compartment in the floorboards. Inside was a manila envelope. And the document inside was the real Bombshell. I didn't open the envelope right away. There was something about it. The way it had been hidden under the floorboards, sealed with wax, my name written in the corner in fading blue ink, that made my hands shake just holding it. I placed it on the old writing desk in the attic and sat there for what felt like hours, the sun crawling across the floor, casting long shadows from the rafters. I don't know what I was expecting. Another letter? A deed to a second property? A posthumous confession? What I didn't expect was what I found. Inside was a thick document, folded twice and stapled at the corner. The top page was official-looking, with a gold notary seal and Grandma's signature at the bottom. It was dated nearly 2 years ago, about 6 months before her final will. It was a revocation, a formal document canceling a previous draft of her will, one that, according to the line item on page 3, had left everything, the cabin, the land, her assets, to my father. Everything. Every square inch. Every item on the property. The bank account attached to the property taxes. All of it. She'd revoked it and replaced it with the will Garrett had read aloud. That much I already knew. But what crushed me was what came next. Folded between the pages was a smaller note. It wasn't long. Just a few lines, handwritten in the same shaky scrawl I remembered from her last few letters. I didn't want to do this. I waited. I gave him every chance to change. But he's still the same scared boy, hiding behind anger. I won't let him hurt you again, Cole. This is the only way I know how to protect you now. I felt something inside me crack open. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was grief, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to feel at her funeral, or when Garrett read her will, or even when I'd watched my father lie through his teeth just days earlier. This wasn't just about property. It never had been. This was about love, about hurt, about the kind of betrayal that festers for decades, passed down like bad genetics. And here was proof, undeniable, irreversible, that she'd chosen me. Not because I deserved it more, or because I asked for it, but because she saw who my father truly was and decided to break the cycle. But even with that knowledge, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, because at the end of the day, this wasn't just my win. It was also her loss. She'd spent the last years of her life watching her son turn into a man she didn't recognize. She must have felt so alone, so disillusioned. And now she was gone, and all I had left were ashes and signatures and silence. I stayed in the attic until the sun went down. Then I walked out onto the porch, sat in Grandma's rocking chair, and watched the stars come out one by one. The fallout came quickly. Garrett filed the final deed paperwork, officially transferring the property into my name. He also contacted the sheriff about the break-in. Nothing came of it. No charges were filed, but the message was clear. Stay away. My parents didn't. At first, it was subtle. Rachel sent me a passive-aggressive text. Hope you're enjoying playing King of the Hill. Just remember, what goes up? My father left a voicemail I didn't return. Cole, I don't know what kind of lies she fed you, but this isn't over. That land was meant for the family. My mother emailed me a photo of the cabin from 20 years ago. No caption. I ignored all of it. Until the mailbox incident. I'd driven into town to pick up some supplies, tools, food, a new space heater to replace the one in Grandma's room. And when I came back, the mailbox was gone. Ripped from the post. It wasn't stolen. Just destroyed. Flattened in the ditch. I replaced it. 2 days later, someone slashed my back tires. I called the sheriff. Filed a report. Nothing happened. No witnesses. No camera footage. Still, I didn't retaliate. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done playing their game. That winter was the hardest I've ever lived through. The snow hit early, mid-November, and didn't let up until March. The cabin, beautiful as it was, wasn't made for long-term isolation. The heating system groaned. The roof leaked near the chimney. The pipes froze twice. I chopped wood until my hands blistered, cooked meals on a stove that hissed when it got too hot, and kept my phone on low-power mode just in case the generator gave out. It was peaceful and brutal. There were days I didn't speak to another human. Days I thought about leaving, selling the place, starting over somewhere warm, with Wi-Fi and neighbors and takeout. Somewhere the ghosts didn't sit on every shelf. But every time I reached that breaking point, something stopped me. Sometimes it was a memory. Grandma teaching me how to make cornbread, humming Patsy Cline while dusting the windowsills, sitting beside me on the dock in total silence. Sometimes it was something I found. An old postcard from the 1950s tucked into a book, a half-finished quilt under the bed, a fishing lure wrapped in tissue paper labeled Cole's first catch. Sometimes, it was just the wind through the trees, whispering like it was trying to say, "You're not alone." I started fixing things, not just out of necessity, but because it gave me purpose. I recaulked the windows, reinforced the roof, repaired the steps on the front porch. Each nail I drove in felt like a reclaiming of space, of history, of myself. I started journaling again, Something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. Just thoughts, ideas, snippets of conversations I imagined having if Grandma were still here. I wrote her a letter, then another, then a whole notebook full of them. And slowly, something shifted. The bitterness began to drain away. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic movie montage. But piece by piece. I stopped checking my phone every morning for another snide message. I stopped thinking about my father's face when he realized he'd been cut out. I stopped fantasizing about revenge or vindication or some final confrontation where I got the last word. I didn't want the last word. I wanted peace. Then, one day in late February, I found a business card wedged into the screen door. No note. Just a name, number, and logo. A realty group. The same one Garrett had mentioned. I called the number, out of curiosity. The woman on the other end answered quickly. "Oh, Cole, you're that." She paused. "Sorry. We've been expecting your call." "Why?" I asked. She hesitated. "Your father told us you'd be reaching out to finalize the sale." My throat went dry. "I'm not selling," I said. Silence. "I see," she said finally. "Well, that's disappointing." He was very convincing. "Yeah," I said. "He usually is." I hung up before she could say anything else. And for the first time in weeks, I felt angry again. Not the wildfire rage from before. This was colder. Focused. They weren't done. Even now, months later, they were still trying to undermine me. Still making calls. Still telling stories. Still trying to wrestle the narrative back into their control. They thought I was isolated. Vulnerable. Alone. They were wrong. I drove down the mountain the next day. Went to the county office. Filed every piece of paperwork I needed. Had the property boundaries resurveyed. Applied for a private mailbox. Ordered a P.O. box in town. Filed a police report for the destroyed one. Then I called Garrett. "Can you help me write a formal cease and desist?" I asked. I want it sent to all three of them. No more contact. No more visits. No more pretending this is their property. I want a paper trail. He agreed. Then I asked him one more question. What would it take to set up a trust? One they can't touch. One that keeps this place safe, even if something happens to me. He paused. Honestly, not much. But, Cole, are you sure you want to do that? It's a big step. I'm sure. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. They hadn't broken me. They'd only shown me exactly who they were. And in doing so, they'd freed me from ever needing them again. It started with an email. A local journalist, her name was Marla Jenkins, reached out in early spring. Said she'd heard about the family drama up by the old McAllister cabin and wanted to talk. I almost deleted it. I wasn't interested in turning my grief into a headline. But something about the way she wrote, curious, not exploitative, made me pause. She'd grown up in the area. Said she remembered my grandmother from her church days, remembered her garden, the rhubarb pies she used to bring to the county bake-offs. Marla hadn't seen Evelyn in years, but she'd heard whispers after the funeral. There's talk going around town, she wrote, that your family's trying to flip the place, even though you inherited it. I replied with one line. They tried. She asked if we could meet. I agreed, reluctantly. We sat on a bench outside the library, 2 thermoses of lukewarm coffee between us. I kept it surface level at first. Told her the short version. Kicked out at 19, went no contact, stayed in touch with my grandmother. She left me the cabin, and suddenly everyone remembered I existed. But Marla wasn't just after gossip. She asked questions that no one else had. Questions about what it felt like to live there now, what I remembered from childhood summers, whether the land still felt haunted, or if it had finally started to feel like mine. That stuck with me. Did it feel like mine yet? I wasn't sure. But something shifted after that conversation. Maybe it was saying it out loud. Maybe it was being seen by someone who didn't have an agenda. But I went home that night and stood on the dock and looked out across the lake and realized it wasn't just where I lived now. It was home. I started a project. It wasn't planned or polished or profitable. It just happened. It began with a single post on an old forum dedicated to historical restoration. I asked a few questions about restoring hand-cut logs, preserving original hardware, insulating stone foundations. Someone replied. Then someone else. Then someone messaged me directly and asked if I'd document my progress. So I did. I made a blog. Simple layout. No ads. Just photos and journal-style updates. I called it Second Foundation, after something Grandma once said when I was helping her replant her flower beds. Sometimes the best way to save something is to rebuild it from where it fell apart. At first, no one read it except a handful of restoration hobbyists. But word spread. People started sharing it. First local folks, curious about the McAllister grandson. Then strangers, history buffs, DIY enthusiasts, people who wanted to believe that broken things could be made beautiful again. By early summer, the blog had a few thousand subscribers. Then 10,000. Then 20. I got an email from a producer at a small streaming network that specialized in slow living and homestead documentaries. She said my story was quietly powerful and wanted to know if I'd consider filming a limited series about restoring the cabin. I said no at first. Then I said yes. Not for the attention. For Grandma. For the woman who never had much but made do with everything she had. For the woman who gave me the only home I'd ever felt safe in. For the woman who fought her own son to give me a chance. I wanted to show the world what she left behind, and what I was building on top of it. Filming started in June. A small crew came up once a month. 2 cameramen, a director, a field producer. They stayed in a nearby motel and followed me around while I repaired the front porch, dug out the old cellar, restored the antique stove, and rebuilt the greenhouse that had collapsed in the 90s. They asked me questions. About the cabin. About my life. About forgiveness. I didn't answer all of them, but I said enough. The show premiered that fall. It was called Rebound. It didn't go viral. It didn't break records. But it resonated. People reached out from all over. Some shared stories of estrangement. Some asked about restoration tips. Some just said thank you. That meant more than the rest. Then came the inheritance my grandmother never told me about. Garrett called again in early October. Do you remember your great-aunt Sylvia? I didn't. She was Evelyn's older sister. Lived in Oregon. Never married. Never had kids. She and your grandmother had a falling out in the 70s and didn't speak again. She passed away earlier this year. No, Will. You're the next legal heir through Evelyn. I blinked. To what? He cleared his throat. A house. A small one. And about 200 acres of undeveloped land. My jaw dropped. I flew out to see it a month later. The house was nothing to look at. Weathered, empty, barely standing. But the land? Rolling hills, a dense forest, a small creek that wound through the back corner like a silver ribbon. I didn't know what to do with it at first. Then I remembered something Grandma told me once. If you ever get a chance to leave something behind that makes the world softer, take it. So I did. I donated part of the land to a conservation trust. Built a small cabin on another part, with reclaimed wood and local stone. Started hosting workshops. Tiny, weekend-long gatherings for people who'd read the blog and wanted to learn how to start over. It became a place for healing. Not just for me. For others like me. People with broken families. People who'd been forgotten. People rebuilding from nothing. We shared stories around a fire pit and taught each other how to mend things with our hands. It was simple, and it was enough. The funny thing about healing is that it makes you see clearly. And once I had distance, real distance, I started to see my parents for who they really were. Not just villains. Not just cold-hearted manipulators. But scared, flawed people clinging to a version of life they could control. I wasn't ready to forgive them. I might never be. But I didn't hate them anymore. I just let go. Stopped checking their profiles. Stopped wondering if they were watching the show, reading the blog, hearing about the land. They probably were. That was fine. Let them see. Let them stew. Because I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I had something better. The cabin was finished in late November. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. The original logs were still there, dark and sturdy. The new windows let in just enough light. The fireplace crackled the way it used to when Grandma would sit with her tea and knit in silence. I stood on the front porch that night, snow just beginning to fall, and realized I hadn't felt afraid in months. Not of them. Not of failure. Not of being alone. Because I wasn't. Not really. I had the cabin. I had the land. I had a life built from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. And I had one more thing. A plan. Because while I wasn't chasing revenge anymore, that didn't mean I wasn't prepared for what came next. I learned quickly that the most satisfying revenge isn't loud. It's surgical. It's the slow, patient stacking of facts until there isn't a story your enemies can hide behind. By the time I started planning, I had things they didn't. A small but growing audience who cared about Grandma and the cabin. A producer who owed me favors. Garrett with a lawyer's calmness. And a county clerk who was tired of the rumor mill and liked neat paperwork. The trick was to turn every one of their moves into a public, documented thing. one that couldn't be spun into family disagreement or misunderstanding. Step 1 was evidence. The crew had kept more footage than I expected. Between formal shoots and the off-camera b-roll, they'd recorded hours of us walking the property, interviews, and, crucially, random clips from days Rachel and my parents were around. I asked quietly if the production team could comb through anything from the week of the funeral. They did more than that. The field producer called me the next day, voice low and excited. "We found something," she said. "You should see this." There it was, grainy footage from the day I'd left the attic, accidentally filmed because a camera had been left rolling in the hallway. For 40 seconds, the clip shows my father moving the bookshelf, Rachel rifling through boxes with an obvious sense of purpose, my mother hovering like a lookout. In another clip, this one from a cameraman who'd been nosy and saved a copy, there's a close-up of a crowbar and a hand trying to jimmy a lock. Not the clearest film in the world, but paired with my note about the broken safe and Garrett's inventory lists, it was damning. The crew handed copies to me and to Marla. Step 2 was official. Garrett filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office, supplied the footage, the photographs of the pried lock, the notarized will, and the revocation documents we'd found in the attic, and the timeline proving my parents were on the property when the safe was opened. He also drafted a concise cease and desist and sent it certified mail. No more visits, no more attempts to list the property, and a warning that any attempted sale would be met with immediate legal action. Garrett had a way with words that made threats sound boring and inevitable. That helped. Step 3 was public. Marla agreed to write an exposé, but she didn't want it sensational. She wanted it to look like reporting. She ran the title past me. How a mountain cabin became the center of a family's feud. The piece included the footage, quotes from the neighbors who'd seen late-night vans and unfamiliar contractors circling the property listing screenshots my parents had floated to the realtor, and Garrett's explanation of the legal chain of custody of the will. When it went live, the local Facebook groups lit up. People who remembered Grandma called the paper. One neighbor I'd barely spoken to before brought over an envelope with text messages he'd recorded. Rachel had been bragging to a friend about getting things set up, and even mentioned the attic. That friend sent the screenshots to Marla. I didn't ask for public pity. I wanted the truth on record. And I wanted the kind of pressure that makes people with greedy plans shrink away. Scrutiny. Within 48 hours of the article, the realtor who'd been talking to my parents backed off and sent a terse email saying they wouldn't list the property without clear, uncontested title. The contractor who'd been quoted in Rachel's binder called Garrett and said he wouldn't be involved in any family business where clients lied about ownership. Even the local historical society put a polite hold on any permits to change the property without a review, something I gently encouraged them to do, knowing any permit would require affidavits from all interested parties. I also used the show and blog. In the next episode of the miniseries, the producer let me run a short segment where I talked about stewardship and respect. Nothing accusatory, just values. Then, at the end of the episode, they played 20 seconds of the attic footage with the crowbar. I didn't speak over it. Few words, sometimes, are more damning than images and the quiet sound of someone searching through someone else's life. That was the setup. It let the law do its work and let the town weigh in without me having to shout. People started calling my parents. Not to berate them, mostly to ask basic questions like, "Are you sure you own the cabin? And did you have the right to be in the attic?" That social pressure gnawed at them. My mother's old friend stopped answering her calls. Rachel's Instagram comments turned from polite curiosity to sharp, blunt questions. The moral center of our little valley had turned their attention toward who was behaving decently and who wasn't. The payoff wasn't theatrical. It was quiet and perfect. One cool Thursday, I sat at my desk and sent a single email to 3 addresses: my parents, Rachel, and the realtor who'd been their contact. Subject line: public notice and invitation. The body was short and clinical. I attached copies of the attic footage, the police report number, the cease and desist, and the county's confirmation of completed transfer of title to my name. I ended the email with one line: "If anyone would like to discuss this, we'll be holding a public, mediated meeting at the community hall next Thursday at 6 p.m. The local paper, the county clerk, and a mediator will be present. If you do not attend, your concerns will be aired in public record. No private settlements will be accepted after that date." I didn't bait them. I simply set the terms where their only options were to either face the facts in public or walk away in shame. The next week my inbox filled with predictable things, tepid appeals to family, a passive-aggressive threat from my father about making Grandma's legacy miserable, and, most telling, a lawyer's letter from a small firm claiming to represent Rachel. Garrett and I read it and shrugged. They were all flailing. What I hadn't expected was how calm it all felt for me. I slept easier. I walked the land without checking my rear view. I let the process breathe and the system take care of the rest. That, more than anything, was the revenge I'd wanted, to no longer have their chaos define my life. 2 days before the meeting, Marla asked if she could run a follow-up piece announcing the mediation and quoting the cease and desist. The article went online late at night. By morning, the whole valley knew there'd be a hearing. Neighbors RSVP'd. 2 of Grandma's old church ladies said they'd bring pies. The Historical Society promised to send a representative. The sheriff, who was more embarrassed than righteous, confirmed he'd have an officer present for safety. On the day, I walked into the community hall carrying 2 thermoses, my notepad, and the envelope with Grandma's letter. The room smelled vaguely of donuts and pine cleaner. People whispered when I passed. My parents arrived last, late, smoothed their coats, and sat at the back like accused actors waiting for their cue. The mediator introduced herself, polite, efficient, asked everyone to state their names. I spoke, even though Garrett could have done it for me. Cole McAllister, I said. I'm here to ensure the wishes of Evelyn McAllister are respected. My voice was steady. The room nodded. Cameras were set up in the back, but they were small, respectful local outlets, no national circus. My father stood when it came to him, voice shaky at first. He stumbled through a version of events that tried to paint him as a dutiful son who had only ever wanted to honor his mother. Rachel's lawyer made a perfunctory argument about family rights and uncertain capacity, but Garrett had already preempted that with the cognitive evaluations and the notarized documents. The mediator asked for specifics. Garrett presented them. The sheriff confirmed the complaint. Marla's recorder clicked softly. Midway through, my mother began to cry. Not the dramatic, performative cry she'd practiced for me in the past, but a small, raw thing that made a few people in the front row glance away. She asked if she could speak. The mediator nodded. She looked at me and said, "Cole, I never meant to." Then her voice caught. The room was quiet. Everyone leaned in. Even my father's shoulders seemed to slump. That was when my phone buzzed. A new email. From an address I didn't recognize. Subject: "You'll want to hear this before you speak." I glanced at Garrett. He did the same. I opened it. Inside was a short audio file. It had been recorded the night the attic was rifled through, the one I'd stumbled upon. The file had been sent by someone who'd been staying at the motel Rachel used, an offhand third party who'd heard a private conversation and shared it when they realized what it meant. The voice on the recording was unmistakable. My father, speaking in a tone I'd heard 100 times, speaking about money, getting what was ours, and a line that made my skin go cold. "Evelyn's signature won't hold if we can show she wasn't of sound mind. We'll just find an old draft, or make one. It'll be cleaner that way." The mediator's clipboard lay forgotten. My mother's face went white. My father's jaw tightened like a clamp. Rachel's attorney paled. I hit play again. The room heard everything. People shifted. A murmur rose. The mediator closed her notebook slowly and said, "I think we need to pause. The sheriff should review this." My parents looked at me then. Anger, fear, calculation all layered on one another. They had one last, frantic thing they could try to do. Claim character, claim sorrow, claim the messy complexity of family. They could try and spin, plead, beg. And they would. But the recording had changed the rules. It moved this from family disagreement into the territory of proof. My heart hammered, less with adrenaline and more with a steady, cold certainty. I'd wanted them stopped, exposed, held accountable. I hadn't wanted humiliation for the sake of it. I wanted a clean field where the cabin could breathe and where Grandma's choices would stand. Outside, the winter sun slanted low. Inside, my mother started to stammer an apology. My father opened his mouth to speak. At that exact moment, the hall doors burst open and someone rushed in, breathless, face flushed from the cold. Heads turned. I looked up and froze, because the person at the door was not a neighbor, not a reporter, not the sheriff. It was someone I hadn't expected to see at all. The person standing at the door was Lily. My sister. Half-sister, technically. I hadn't seen her since I was 15. She was younger than me by 5 years, quiet, awkward, always walking on eggshells around our father. Back then, she'd been the ghost of the house, present, but never spoken to unless she was needed for a chore or to back up a lie. I left at 19 and never looked back. She stayed, and then vanished. But here she was. Taller, sharper, different, but not. Same eyes. Same nervous energy. Her coat was damp from snow. Her breath came fast, like she'd run the last mile. She stood in the doorway, frozen as the whole room turned toward her. She looked straight at me, then at our parents, then back to me. I have something to say, she said, breathless. The mediator blinked, clearly thrown. Your name? Lily McAllister. My father's face dropped. Pale, then red. Lily, don't. But she walked past him like he didn't exist. Marla was already moving her recorder closer. Garrett leaned forward, lips pressed in a line. And I just stared, unsure if I was still breathing. Lily stopped beside the center table. She was shaking, shoulders tight, fists clenched, but her voice was steady. I lived with them after Cole left, she said, voice thin but clear. I know what they did. My mother gasped. My father stepped forward. Lily, no. But it was too late. I heard them talk about forging a will, she said. Back in January, before Grandma died. I thought they were joking at first. But then Rachel started bringing over samples of old paperwork, trying to find signatures that matched. They said Cole didn't deserve the cabin, that he'd probably sell it or let it rot. She pulled a small envelope from her pocket. I saved this. I didn't know what to do with it. But I found it in Rachel's car after she left one night. A draft of a will with Grandma's name typed on it. Not signed. Dated wrong. It didn't match the real one. She handed it to the mediator. Silence. Total, absolute silence. Until my father finally exploded. This is absurd, he barked. You're just trying to what? Get in Cole's good graces? You think he's going to share it with you? You think. Be quiet, Lily said. Soft, but final. He stopped cold. And I saw it then. Not just anger. Not just betrayal. Fear. The walls were closing in. I don't remember the rest of the meeting word for word. Just the feel of it. Like a weight being lifted off my chest in slow, satisfying increments. The mediator excused my parents from the room. The sheriff escorted them outside. Marla asked Lily for an interview. Garrett whispered something about escalation, criminal fraud, and revocation of parental credibility in future claims. I walked out into the cold, stunned. Lily followed. We stood in the parking lot for a long moment before I found words. Why now? She gave a small, sad smile. Because I watched them try to bury you. And then I watched you rise. And I realized I didn't want to be part of their silence anymore. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You still talk to them? She shook her head. Not anymore. Then she looked up at the cabin in the distance, nestled between trees and snow and quiet sky. Is it really as peaceful up there as it looks? I smiled. Come see for yourself. A month later, I hosted the first winter gathering at the cabin. Small group. 10 people. A wood stove, hot soup, old music playing from a radio. Lily came, stayed in the loft room Grandma used to use for guests. She helped me mend curtains, fix a loose stair, paint the trim. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. One night, sitting by the fire, she turned to me and said, I think she knew. About all of it. I think she was waiting for us to find each other again. I didn't answer, but I looked out across the room at the picture of Grandma on the mantel, smiling, hands folded, hair wild and gray, and I swore she smiled back. The investigation into the forgery attempt stalled after a few months. No hard proof of signatures used, no physical break-in, but it didn't matter. My parents were finished. The community had turned its back on them. Rachel's marketing job quietly disappeared. My father resigned from the community board. My mother moved to Arizona. No one threw stones. But no one opened their doors either. They were forgotten. And I was finally free. The cabin still stands. The blog lives on. The workshops are full. And every now and then, when the fire's low and the night's quiet, I take out Grandma's letter, the first one, and read it again. You're more than what they told you. She was right. I am. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever forgets her for that. Or me.